is Camilla, and you're listening to The Cat's Whisker, a time machine for all those who love rock and roll and want to know everything about it. People, stories, and the music that changed the world. In a few words, it doesn't matter whether you've lived through those years or, just like me, you've always wondered what it was like. I have loads of stories to tell and great music to play. So, let's roll! Hello everyone and welcome back to The Cat's Whisker. This is Camilla and today we're going to talk about something a bit different, something a bit technical. We're going to talk about the history of the AC30 and VOX in general, a British industry that in the 60s conquered the world. And since I can't really be trusted with the technical side of things, with me, just like in the past, we have Liam Mannion, musician and resident at the Cavern Club. Hello.
Hello.
I always ask for his help when it comes to technical things because I'm not a musician, and you and you definitely know more about stage gear than I do. In fact, I believe you've been quite obsessed with stage gear over the years.
Yes, quite obsessed.
And tell us, why should we talk about the AC30? Why is it so special? We're going to investigate all the technical reasons later, but tell us, why do you think it is so special?
Because it's the classic British sound and it's been used on countless recordings over the years since it was made popular by a band that we all know. Not just them, obviously, but...
Yeah. So obviously Liam was talking about the Beatles, but there are many other bands that actually endorsed VOX and the AC30 in particular. But since I love a little bit of drama, I also want to tell to all the other people that are not very technically trained, like myself, that this story is worth listening because it's full of drama and twists and turns. So let's begin. So, first of all, VOX is from Dartford in the south of England. It was founded by Tom Jennings and Dick Denny. Tom was an accordion player and met Dick, who was an amateur guitarist passionate about electronics during the war. They were playing together in the air shelters. After the war, Tom opened a music shop, the Jennings Organ Company, where he refurbished old accordions and other instruments, but he wanted to build something new. And Dick Denny was the perfect partner to do just that, because he knew about electronics way more than Jennings did. It was 1952 when they released their first original product, the Univox, a portable self-powered keyboard. And it was so portable that the speaker and the leads were literally stored in a suitcase. It worked with valves, and that actually gave them two ideas. The first one was to build a company that would create instruments and amplification systems. And that's what they do in 1957. And second, to call it VOX, which is Latin for voice. At the end of the 50s, rock and roll was massive and everyone wanted an electric guitar. And what do electric guitars need? Amplification. And since there was a ban on importation of US-made goods that lasted from 1951 to 1959, VOX became the leading company in the sector. And how did that happen? So they took the speakers from the Univox and they made the G10, a guitar amp. Wasn't very good, but it was a start. But that gave them the idea for the AC15, which stood for Amplifier Combined 15 Watts. They knew they had a great product and they contacted Britain's biggest band of the moment. Do you know who they were?
The Shadows.
Yes. So they contacted the Shadows that started using the amps, but with the growing competition from Fender, who was making high quality instruments and high quality amps, like the Fender Twin, Deluxe, etc., they had to up their game. Also, the Shadows, being so famous, had girls screaming and ripping their clothes off for Cliff Richard, and using 15 watts amps started being a problem. So the band went to VOX and said, listen, we dig your amp, but we can't hear what we're playing. Dick Denny decided to start working on a double AC15, Tom Jennings, though, didn't want to hear it. He thought it was going to be too loud, too distorted, and said to his partner that was just impossible to make. Denny, though, believed in his idea and decided to continue working on it in secret. One day, Jennings found out, and oh boy, to be a fly on the wall. The huge fight ended with Jennings telling Denny, "Fine, you can make 10 double AC15, but if it goes wrong, it's all your fault and you take full responsibility." And that's how the AC30, the greatest amplifier in music history, was born. I mean, isn't that crazy that literally the people that produced it and made a lot of money out of it at the beginning weren't really into it?
That's usually the case with most things, isn't it? You say that about a lot of startup companies, or even bands, or even people who end up rich from something that they didn't think it was going to do well in. Stupid. That's the word.
You gotta have a vision, I guess.
You have to have somebody like Dick that has the vision for it and actually willing to take a risk.
It's very hard to believe in something when everyone else tell you not to do it. So what did they do? They gave the amps to the Shadows, and that was just the first of many bands that would adopt VOX amps. The most famous of all time was just around the corner. One day, a very kind and proper gentleman walks into a music shop in London asking about the AC30 amps. "Yes, sir, how many would you like to buy?" I imagine the employee saying. The gentleman looks at him and candidly says, "I can't really make an impression here." "Oh, I don't want to buy... Oh, I don't want to buy them. I want you to give them to me so I can give them to one of my bands." The other guy's jaw must have dropped. He called to his manager that said, "What are we, a philanthropic organization? Who the hell does he think he is?" Well, he was. You guess.
Michael Jackson.
Why is it always your answer?
It's funny.
One day it's going to be the right one. Who was it?
Brian Epstein.
Yes, it was Brian Epstein, the Beatles manager. Again, talking about having a vision. He literally wanted them to give...
He was a great guy.
Yeah. And I believe in the documentary we watched about VOX's history that the guy said, "Oh, what is the band's name?" The Beatles. And he said, "That's not even a good name for a start."
Yeah. They had a lot of that.
And, you know, I guess he was a man that knew how to get things done.
Incredible guy, Brian Epstein.
Yeah.
I hope they do more documentaries and stuff
We
on
should
him.
actually do an episode only about Brian Epstein.
Yeah, he's a fascinating character.
Yeah. Well, let us know if you would like to hear us babbling about Brian Epstein probably for 2 hours straight. Because that might happen in the future. But he made it. So he left the shop with a bunch of new amps and a promise. His band would have exclusively used VOX stage gear. And that's what the Beatles did for their whole career.
Not the whole career, but his deal was for as long as he was the manager, they would only use VOX. And that's what happened until he died.
Yeah.
After that, they started using Fender and stuff.
Yeah, but they weren't even performing live, were they?
No.
So, I guess stage career?
Yeah, the whole stage time was all
Yeah.
VOX.
But I think it wasn't only because they were tied to this deal.
I think they got a little bit dissatisfied with them later on. Just because they wanted that American sound.
Yeah.
Because don't forget, they didn't think, oh yeah, the British sound is great.
No, exactly.
They wanted to
It's
sound
only
like
something
Americans,
that came
you know?
afterwards, like, oh, the sound of the British invasion. But while they were, doing it, they probably didn't realize.
Now they're always trying to get the more American sound,
So what were they using? I know that they had to have their sound boosted a few times because it was very, very hard to hear what they were playing.
The very first ones, I think John had an AC15 and George had the AC30 because there was only two in the shop. Probably Rushworths. They were the cream ones, which were lovely. But because obviously John was rhythm and George was lead, they decided that John would have the AC15 and George would have the AC30.
Yeah, fair enough.
Both look the same, just different
Power.
power. And then they got the... I'm not sure if the first black ones were just recovered. I seem to think in my head that somewhere in the past of me delving into the Beatles stuff that the first black ones were actually just recovered.
Mm-hmm.
So it was the same answer they had at first, and then they got both AC30s. Paul got the
T60.
T60.
Yeah, but I've heard that one always had problems because it overheated.
Yeah, it was actually a solid state, that one.
Yeah.
It wasn't a valve amp, and it had a lot of problems.
But I've read that obviously they had to have a boost, both John and George, in the back panel, and that became like an AC50 basically.
Yeah, then they changed. If you see the 1964 US Washington one, you can see them. They're AC50s.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's a cabinet and a amp separate. It wasn't a combo.
Mm-hmm.
You can just see the speaker cabinet.
Yeah.
And then the amp would be on the floor.
And then I read that they used something that is called AC100 actually because it needed to be very, very powerful for America.
Yeah, if you get like later on.
Well, for the Shea
massive.
Stadium, didn't they prepare something specific?
Yeah, I can't remember the actual one, but they were like really tall things, big. By the end of it, they were massive.
Yeah. And still, they couldn't really hear themselves, I think.
Yeah.
Because the venues were big, the crowd was massive, and no one was really used to that amount of people.
Yeah, it was a bit new thing, wasn't it, that type of show? I think that later on in recording, they always preferred the AC30 over the other VOX stuff they had.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the recordings even later would be on the AC30 as far as I'm aware. Because it was just a better amp than those big things. Just a decent amp. It's perfect. It just wasn't loud enough because it didn't have the PA equipment then. If it was now, it wouldn't be a problem. They'd just mic it up, you know.
You use the AC30 for the shows where you're not provided with PA.
Yeah. Well, I use it all the time.
Now, I'm going to ask you a question that I always wonder. Is there like a specific way, because I think there is, to mic up an amp? And what's the best way to mic up something like an AC30?
Well, for live work, I always get told by the sound people that you can choose at either speaker, because obviously both speakers produce the same sound. You would normally just have one mic on one speaker, and it's usually the position is just a little bit off axis, like to the left or the right of the speaker, usually the left. I always see it not in the middle of the speaker.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I think it's slightly over to the just off axis.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably sound engineers listening to this, so no, that's completely wrong.
Please let us know.
But that's what I've always noticed or seen.
Mm-hmm. But, you know, we know that the Beatles were the ones to make VOX a very big deal. But they weren't the only band that was using VOX.
Everybody then.
Yeah. The Rolling Stones, actually, which, funnily enough, Mick Jagger and Keith Richards are both from Dartford.
Yeah.
And apparently their early gigs were a showcase of VOX equipment. And then we have the Searchers, we have the Hollies, the Animals, so many bands were actually using it. And as we were saying, VOX powered the music of the British invasion, from the gigs that people were doing in pubs to the ones at the Shea Stadium, you know.
Yeah, it was all VOX.
It's absolutely amazing. VOX used to send its engineers on tour with the acts they were sponsoring, obviously, if they were big acts like the Beatles or the Rolling Stones. And one of their engineers, Alan Harding, has been lucky enough to go on tour both with the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. And he's got interesting stories to tell. Like, for example, when he was on tour with the Beatles for Paul's 21st birthday party, he saw a box with a big 21st written on it, and a girl came out of her box. How did they define her clothing?
Scantily clad.
Which is a word I didn't know. And I don't know. It's not surprising to me. And probably...
I'm sure you would have preferred a Vox. A new Vox.
Are you sure? Maybe a girl coming out of a Vox amp. No, because then it's not a real amp, is it?
Sure you would have preferred a reliable Vox.
Paul, if you're listening, I hope you are. Let us know. And the Rolling Stones, this story about the Rolling Stones, again, I don't think would surprise anyone, but I just think it's so funny. Is that when they were on tour and this engineer was at the hotel bar, at the hotel restaurant, he would see the band coming down for breakfast with women dresses. And he was so embarrassed that he would try to
dissociate.
Yeah, like sit the furthest away from them in the restaurant. How mad
Disassociate, I think is right.
But it's always so crazy, all the people that obviously keep the machine up and running, and they are not even living glamorous lives. And imagine these people from like Dartford, probably born in the 20s. They suddenly are on tour with, all these musicians, and it's
probably hating every minute of it.
I always wonder that, because the old school people are probably like, what the fuck is this shit?
Yeah, probably.
So here we go. Let's talk about what makes VOX amps so great, specifically the AC30. So the sound is different. It's clear and it's not too distorted. What can you say about what makes them different, for example, from Marshall amps or Fender amps?
Well, actually, the idea in the early days of amplification was to get rid of distortion, because obviously it makes sense, you would want a clear sound. So they used to have, don't ask me how it actually works technically, but it's called like negative feedback.
Oh yeah, I have a note.
Which cancels out distortion.
Yeah, because basically in hi-fi systems, you want to listen to exactly what you put in. So what you put in the system,
you want it to reproduce that exactly
when it comes out of the system. So obviously all amps had some level of distortion on the output.
Yeah.
And negative feedback was their way to try to avoid that.
Yeah. Again, I don't exactly know how they did that.
Oh, I don't really know.
Some electronic wizardry.
Exactly. But so what about it?
So then when VOX were creating their stuff, they thought, and rightly so, that the electric guitar sounds a little bit better when it's got some distortion on it. So they didn't put the negative feedback circuitry in it, so it would create like a natural distortion. If you have it at low, anyone who's played amps with guitars knows, but especially valve amps, a different beast. Because if you play, I used to play solid state at first, and they're alright, but once you've played a valve amp, it really is like CD and vinyl. It's a different thing altogether. You get more natural sustain. The notes are clearer. You can hear separate notes more than you can with a solid state. It sort of disappears on a solid state. Just hard work. A solid state amp.
Oh, right, okay.
You've got to put more work in.
Yeah.
Because it won't sustain as much.
But what would you say about like the very high quality Fender amps or Marshall amps?
Well, they would be valve. But Marshall's more.
Sound.
Yeah, Marshall's more like set up for
big heavy distortion.
The 70s classic rock era type stuff.
Is Fender like more like early rock and roll?
Yeah.
Super clean.
Yeah. But then they did do amps later on, which were more. Although I'm sure because it's still a valve amp, I'm sure when you wind up a Fender valve amp, it will start to give you some distortion, obviously. But apart from, I had one good Fender amp, but it didn't last very long.
Oh yeah, tell this story.
So when I started the first band that I was in, our key goal at first was to get decent valve amps. So the bass player got one first. It was an Ashdown. And then the rhythm guitarist got a Vox. It was called a Tony Bruno. It's a little bit like a AC30, but different. It was a special edition thing, dead nice. And then I got a Fender Blues Deluxe, which is like a tweed amp. Looks great. Sounded really, really nice for about 5 or 6 weeks. And then it was brand new and it just died at one gig. So I took it back to the shop. They couldn't find anything wrong with it. They ran it all day. Couldn't find anything wrong with it. A couple of gigs later, it died again completely. And I took it back to the shop and they said it was the ribbon wiring. It was a faulty point on them. Just cheap wiring.
So basically...
So I had a choice.
You heard it here.
I could have it fixed again. Or I could swap it for something of a similar price and pay the difference or get the difference back. So I asked if they had any AC30s in. And they had one in the Manchester shop. This was Dawson's Music. So I thought, well, yeah. I'll only have to pay about 70 quid difference. So I was like, yeah, give me that box. I'll have the AC30. Because I wanted one anyway. So that's what I did. Got the AC30. Loved it, Never had a problem with it apart from one valve change, and that's in probably 8 years now. 7 or 8 years.
So
it's due for a valve change again, but I've never had any other problems with it.
It must have been made up when you finally got it.
Yeah. It was the modern one, obviously modern equivalent, the AC30 C2, which just means Celestion 2 speakers.
Yeah.
The greenbacks, the budget.
Oh, we're gonna get to that. So I have another interesting point of view here that I read again because I am not able to actually express these things with my own words, but I tried to find out how and why AC30s are so special. And I found this very, very interesting piece that Dave Hunter wrote on Vintage Guitar magazine. And he said, instead of just cobbling together a medium-powered gramophone amp with a 1/4 inches input and built-in speakers, VOX voiced every element of the AC15 circuit and then the AC30s to accentuate the guitar's full lows, forward mids, and shimmering highs. And that actually makes me think of all the other new, features of the AC30s. Not only the Celestion Blue G12 Alnico magnet speakers with the 4 inputs, 2 for normal and vibrato channels, and then the top boost, which I believe was a big upgrade.
Yeah. Actually, the first ones had 6 inputs because you had a separate tremolo channel. Mm-hmm. You had a normal channel with 2 inputs, a top boost channel with 2 inputs, and then the tremolo channel with 2 inputs. Mm-hmm. And the trouble is you just had to swap for each. If you wanted tremolo, you had to swap it into the other channel. Whereas mine, the modern one, it's got a tremolo circuit.
What channel do you usually use?
Always top boost in the top input. Mm-hmm. So the most top you can get.
Yeah.
Treble wise.
Fair enough. And let's talk about the valves.
So in the power stage, they use EL824s. Mm-hmm. And in the preamp stage, they use ECC83s or 12AX7s, which is just the same, really. Mm-hmm. Somebody's going to kill me for saying it.
But, that's the only fault that everyone always talks about. But I guess it works the same for all valve amps. That the obviously that's the only unreliable part, because in general I think AC30s are very reliable, but so much so that when anyone expressed any type of concern about their reliability, they would test them and throw them like
Yeah, I don't think you
on
could
a
do that with
3-flight
mine.
of stairs.
I think if you threw mine down,
Do you want to try?
No, the old ones are probably more sturdy. In fact, definitely everything is.
Yeah, and that actually leads me to another question. What's the difference between an AC30, for example, that the Beatles were using, compared to an AC30 that is sold today? I know obviously there are different types,
there's a range,
and different prices as well. So let's say that someone was, just like us, obsessed with the Beatles and obsessed with guitar gear, and wanted to know what to buy. Obviously, we agree that VOX makes a lot of different amps. I think it's a Pathfinder.
Yeah.
And it's quite good. We have the same. It's a small one. You have the bass one. I have the guitar one.
Yeah.
They're good, but obviously the AC30, I know that it's not for all pockets. You have to save up quite a bit to afford one. But if you wanted to buy one, let's try to give, I don't know, like some sort of details about what's the difference between the old ones, the new ones, and the different ones.
Well, the old ones would have been not made out of MDF, but the wood that they made them out of would have been better wood, obviously. Everything would have been hand wired, as it was, with probably ex-military electricians usually in those days. So everything was pretty quality made. Speakers would have been what are now considered the posh speaker of the blue Alnico magnet. Not the magnet isn't blue, the speakers are blue. It's just that everyone calls them that.
You have the green one, don't you?
Oh, you have to show me up. Yeah, the green ones are Celestian greenbacks. Still, again, with stuff like speakers, it's sort of personal taste, isn't it? But they started making speakers out of ceramics because it was cheaper. Probably started in the late 60s.
But that doesn't mean that they're not equally as good.
Well, yeah, it's just a different sound.
I guess it's personal taste.
Personal taste.
I think I prefer blue.
Of course. But yeah, they wouldn't. The good thing about the 60s is you couldn't really get a cheap. It's a bad thing and it's a good thing, because now you've got more choice because you can get a cheaper version of it, but it might not be as good. It might not be as good quality. The range is so vast now that I don't even know what they're doing. I just know that the top end is hand wired.
Yeah.
Which is just as they were, probably. As good as easily as the old ones. And I think the wood is not MDF either. It's made out of proper, I don't know what they make them out of, but it's not going to be MDF. Not that there's anything wrong with MDF. It's sonically neutral, apparently they tell us. It sounds like a good marketing thing, doesn't it? It's not going to affect the amp either way. It's not going to give the sound any better sound, but it's not going to take anything away.
Yeah.
That's what they tell me. But
people talking to you about VOX amps.
I'd love a hand-wired one, but they're coming in at ridiculous prices.
Oh, well, I think we've seen a video. Yes, it was like 2,000.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
And they look like the original Beatles ones, the cream ones.
About the control that you have over the sound. How you can personalize it.
Yeah, you've got more choice with the cheaper ones, in effect, because the hand-wired ones are made to be like the original one, so you don't have as much control. I don't think they have a treble and a bass control. I think it's just one tone control. I don't think it has built-in reverb,
which makes them very similar to the
original ones. Yeah, they didn't have built-in reverb. You would have had one control for tone, which would have literally just said tone on it. You might have had tone cut. I'm not sure, but that's the good thing about the later ones, like mine. You've got a lot more choice.
Yeah.
Control over your sound, basically. You've got treble, bass. You've got tone cut as well. Reverb built in, spring reverb. which is the better reverb. Just more control. Just not quite as quality made. Unless you get the hand-wired one, but then you've got less control over what you... So it's just...
Yeah.
I would have a hand-wired one and just use a reverb pedal if I had to.
Yeah, fair enough.
Just so nice. Professional opinion. They are so nice.
Yeah, that's why I called you in.
My Fender Blues Deluxe amp I've got very fond memories of it, albeit not many. But
yeah, it lasts, how long did it last? 2 months?
Probably about, something like that.
Oh.
It was so nice that.
It looked nice.
Yeah. It had decent valves in it. They make what I use now, groove tubes. Decent speaker, I think it was a Jensen speaker. It sounded great for a very short period. And
Didn't the handle break as well?
Oh yeah, the handle. I was just about to say it was well made, but the handle broke on it.
You heard it here. Probably not the best choice if you actually move around a lot.
Yeah, if you're shoving them in the back
gear.
of vans and stuff, it's gonna be a delicate process. But
yeah. So let's go back to the story. They want to get business in America.
Vox.
Yes. Well, I mean, a lot of the acts that use Vox are established names like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones. They are successful in America as well, so why not, So what happens is that they make a deal with Thomas Organ Company to license the making of their amps in the States. It goes great at the beginning. The Monkees even used to hide inside a Vox cabinet in 1967 for their grand entrance to their shows. And in the same year, Vox makes a deal with George Barrison, the mind behind the Batmobile, to hit it big times in the States. And this unusual collaboration resulted in the Voxmobile, which was a Ford Roadster that is also an amp, but it's also an organ, and it's also a guitar. And I'm going to put a picture in my Instagram stories because it's absolutely crazy. Would you ever drive around with one of those?
I don't think so.
Oh my God, it's like one of those.
It looks a bit like the Batmobile, doesn't it?
Yeah, but because it's the same person who designed it.
How is it?
I just said it.
Oh. I wasn't listening.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it appeared in TV programs or something like that. But, the thing is, they weren't only producing amps, and that's also what they wanted to advertise, because they were also making musical instruments. So let's talk about that. So they were making a lot of different things, and I think in general probably amps was and still is what they are
best known for.
Yeah, best known for. But they were making keyboards, guitars, and at the beginning, guitars, even if they were endorsed by Brian Jones from the Rolling Stones, by their own admission, weren't really good. But by the mid-60s, they were definitely a bit better. But again, on their side, they had famous musicians that were using them again. Brian Jones was using a teardrop-shaped Mark VI.
Tony Hicks.
And Tony Hicks was using
the 12-string.
Yeah, 12-string Phantom 12. Do you like... I'm on the fence about this. I don't really like them. They don't look very nice. They have very weird shapes. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just check some pictures out.
I never used to like
weird.
those 60s shaped guitars, but now I think they look great.
In your old age.
Yeah, I think they look excellent, especially the one that Tony Hicks used.
I think that it's also because there was this fascination about space that everything had to look futuristic or something like that.
I like them now. I think they look good, those 60s designs.
Oh, maybe in a few years when I'm going to be old like you.
Like the Dan Electro bass. That looks great.
I like the Dan Electro bass.
Yeah, just excellent shapes.
Yeah, I don't know. They look like Brian Jones's guitar. Looks like a mandolin.
I don't mind it. I think it looks alright.
You don't mandolin.
My favourite is the Tony Hicks one.
It's
like
nice.
his
It's
like
all
design.
right. It's all right. But the good thing is that Dick Denny was always trying to experiment. So once he plugged the guitar in an OXO box, and obviously,
And it was all gravy.
oh my god. But guess what happened next? The fuzz box was born, and the Rolling Stones used it straight away on Satisfaction, probably the most famous song. And that was a massive success because it paved the way for pedals and a lot of different effects on guitars. Jimi Hendrix would use a lot of them as well, like the wah-wah one.
Yeah.
You know, and Vox also produced very good organs as well. I mean, it kind of started that way, organs and keyboards. And a Vox Continental, for example, was played by John Lennon at the Shea Stadium during I'm Down, and it's, you know, it's great. I wish I had one. But interestingly enough, Dick Denny decided to produce something that was, you know, a mixture between these two instruments together, like a guitar and an organ. And created, believe it or not, the guitar organ. Oh my god. The body was the one of a Phantom 6 guitar, but the electronics were something completely new. And since I wasn't sure about how that worked, I will tell you what Wikipedia says. Organ tones are sounded in one of three ways. In normal mode, by pressing any string onto a fret. In percussion mode, by fretting any string and touching the included brass plectrum connected to a short wire plugged into a socket on the scratch plate onto any metal part of the guitar, or by pressing one of the 6 open string buttons. There is also an option to silence the lowest 2 strings, and the organ section as a whole can also be switched off. There is a 4-position octave selector, a 6-position effect selector, a 4-way selector for the percussion, and a flute selector.
I'd love to see how much one of them goes for now.
Oh, hang on. But the thing is, like, I read that in 1966, Vox, just to, you know, kind of have an endorsement, gave one to John Lennon. But he never recorded anything with it. I wish he did.
I don't know why he didn't, because they were experimental. Weren't they?
Exactly. Especially towards that era, you know.
Yeah.
Oh my god, I think he probably thought that it was a very ugly looking thing.
Maybe.
Way too experimental even for them. But yeah, it's very weird. I mean, it's a bit too complicated probably.
I wouldn't mind one.
I wouldn't mind one. I would try to play it. It sounds very complicated. Like there are too many settings that I think, well, I'm gonna buy an organ instead, you know. But
for those days, though, that was like.
Yeah, because it's like in those days it was like, oh yeah, fuck it, let's try it, you know.
Yeah.
That was the mindset, I guess.
How did more people not get electrocuted? Earthing out things.
Probably
like
they
that.
did. You know, I just love the thought that this factory in Dartford in England had 150 employees, and it was producing these futuristic things and going to America, making a Batmobile where you can actually play the piano. It was crazy.
We were once the leaders of the world.
And you know, producing all these, you know, kind of cutting edge technological instruments. But since they were so popular, well, I guess the guitar organ wasn't that popular, but in general, Vox was popular. They couldn't really cope because they had so much demand that the 150 employees couldn't really produce all those instruments or amps. So Jennings decided to sell controlling interest to the Royston Group, a company in the field of military electronics that was testing the technology to produce the black box. You know, the one that you have like on planes to
record the
like if something goes wrong and that resists. So obviously that was, you know, a big invention and a big deal. He thought that was going to be a great move, and that With that, VOX could produce more and fulfill their constant demand. Unfortunately, they found themselves completely submitted to the other company, and all the money that VOX had was taken to finance the black box. And unfortunately, when Royston soon went under, it took VOX with it. Royston and Jennings tried funding a new company, but nothing would ever be as successful as VOX, which is obviously still in business and is today owned by Korg. And it is said that the latest models, so the ones produced, I think from 2005 onwards, are the most loyal AC30s that have ever been produced to the ones that were originally produced. Because I assume that when VOX went under, the brand obviously stayed important, because they went under not because they didn't have enough people buying their products, but because of bad investments. And especially since, you know, the Beatles were always some sort of, you know, always attracted.
A constant.
Yeah, obviously. Always attracted interest. People kept buying VOX products. The problem really was that it just changed company constantly until 1992, when Korg bought it, and they're still the father company this day.
I don't mind being produced by Korg.
No, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. But probably since they went, like, they fell into different hands for a very, very long time, nobody could be bothered producing a very loyal copy of the originals, whereas now apparently they're the most loyal.
I do get the chance to play alongside a guy who has one of the early 60s AC30s.
Oh, yeah.
His name's Neil Ainsby. Shout out to Neil. Great guy. And it does sound very nice.
Would you say it's similar to yours?
It's similar, but it's more bassy. It's got more warmth. Probably because you haven't got, like I said, you haven't got the treble and bass controls. It's a tone control.
Yeah.
But it's a very nice, warm, lovely sound. It's less harsh, I think. Mine's probably that could be the speakers though.
Yeah.
The greenbacks are a little bit more harsh, I think. One day I might save up and buy some blue.
Yeah?
Cream. They do cream ones as well, which is slightly different.
Is it?
Just in terms of ohms and output. But they do cream backs, they call. It looks like the Alnico, but it's the same. It's Alnico, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of blue, the cream. Not that most people see the front of the amp. But I like to look at the speakers. Although you can't see them as much on the Vox like mine, because the back is virtually completely covered.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the old ones are a bit more open, you can see the speakers more.
You're a bit of a freak then, aren't you?
Yeah.
I just want to point out that VOX is not paying us to do this. Because it sounds like...
Although it's an invitation.
Hello, VOX, if you're hearing me, I'm here. He's got an AC30. I don't have an AC30, so whatever you want.
Yeah, and Vox amps are the best amplifiers in the world. Snap out. I don't know what happened.
Something got in you. But yeah, guys, I mean, I understand that there is a big market out there, that there are a lot of possibilities, but if you want a sound that is very similar to the one of the British Invasion or rock and roll in general, I think the VOX AC30 is the amp for you.
Well, you can go smaller than that. If you're not playing live, you're not playing
exactly,
in a band.
like the ones we have here at home.
They do an AC15 1. They do an AC10, I think. Yeah. There's lots of choice anyway, from small bedroom amps to
big stage amps. Yeah, of course.
Amps. But the AC30 is like the staple.
Yeah.
I think the one of mine is a reasonable price if you're actually using it for live work. Well, anyway, with whatever you're using it for. I think they're around the £800 mark now.
Yeah, the little ones that we've got there, the Pathfinders, I think are around the 100 and something.
Yeah, I think.
Which is quite good if you don't really want to use it for like, a stage performance, but you only use it to practice. Actually, Vox, we actually are talking about AC15s or AC30s, but even in the 60s, they had like, the student version, all the ones to practice in your home, etc. Because, it's not only a big cost, but it's also, a useless amount of space that it takes if you don't really need a big amp.
But if it's like your hobby and you collect these things, you just like playing in general, it's worth getting something that you really like.
Absolutely.
You like the sound of it.
Because people don't really consider the quality of an amp when they actually buy even a very good quality guitar.
Most people use pedals, which you do need it for certain styles of music, obviously, but this is a rock and roll podcast, okay? We're talking about rock and roll. I don't want to make anybody angry, but I struggle to see the point of having a really decent amp and then put pedals through it. Mm-hmm. What's the point? You might as well make your own speaker,
Yeah.
Because it's the pedal that's producing the sound.
Yeah.
Then the amp's just the cabinet, basically.
Yeah, obviously it depends on what you want to play again, because if you're playing maybe something
you
like
do need
80s
it, yeah, obviously you need it for certain styles.
Yes.
But if you just want to hear the sound of an amp, don't put a pedal through it.
Okay, now last question before we go. What's the best setup for rock and roll music?
Do you mean this amp setting?
Yeah.
So this would be like wild speculation again, won't it? Personally, I've got many compliments actually on.
Yes, exactly. That's also
tone.
why I was asking. But I guess it also depends on the guitar you're using. So
The
give
thing
us
that,
some specific, some.
There's a certain thing that has happened to me a few times, and I quite like it. It's at gigs when other guitarists come up to us at the end and say, that's such a great tone that you get out of that amp. What pedals do you use? And they're looking around on the floor to see what pedals you've got, And you feel they're proud of you saying, no, don't use pedals. Just use the amp and the guitar. And then they want to know what setting you use,
Yeah.
So my guitar is Hofner very thin.
Mm-hmm.
Hofner. Hofner very thin.
Hofner is already one of my friends because they always repost everything I put. So
2 humbucker pickups. I only ever use the bridge pickup. I never use the neck pickup because it's for losers. No, no, just not what I like. I like the treble sound. I only ever use that. Tone is on 10 all the time on the guitar, and the volume. Then I will use the volume to go between solo playing and lead breaks and just normal playing, and that even has an effect more so on a valve amp, because the more signal you put into the guitar, the more you get out of the amp. So it'll be a different sound if you have the guitar volume low. It's great because it's a different sound. That's what you want, And then on the amp, I will have, depending on the room, volume is, there's no point thinking about the volume. But usually I have the preamp volume a little bit lower than the main volume, the master volume. And the treble and bass setting is always sort of, treble is around 2 o'clock and the bass is around 10 or 11 o'clock. Again, depending on the room, but that's usually my go-to setting. Dead simple, bit of reverb. Bish bash bosh.
Yeah, and I know I'm biased, but I think your guitar tone is incredible, honestly.
I'm always thinking of trying to get it better, but it's great when I've had so many compliments off of the guitarists.
But that's also, why I asked you to be here for this episode, because I know how much research.
I'm just giving away the secrets to the Shakers sound.
But I know how much research and passion and obsession goes into it, and I know that you've been actually trying a lot of different things for years, and different gear, but also different settings.
So I just had a flashback memory to one of my early gigs. In my first band, and I was using a high watt amp. I've still got the amp. I can't remember the model, but it's an 80s one, I think. Single 12 speaker, solid state, decent amp. But I just remember I was doing this particular gig where one of my guitarist friends, Tom Chanley, who taught me so many things about how to set up an amp, how to set up PA systems. He's great, Tom. And he always stuck in my memory because I had just set the amp up to how I would have thought it would have been. And Tom came over after like sound check or something. And let's have a look at your amp settings. And then he came over and I remember distinctly he was going, whoa, 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 no, 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 no. and had the bass like quite high on the amp. And he always told me that for lead playing. Obviously, again, depends on the music you're playing. But it just stuck with me because he said, never have your bass more than halfway. And it just stuck with me, you know. Mm-hmm. Obviously, again, depends on the style of music you're playing. But if you're playing what I usually play, this works well. And it's always stuck with me that... Because I've heard many guitarists playing and you think, God, you can't hear the singular notes because they've got that much bass on.
Yeah.
It's just like...
It's not chimey enough.
Yeah. But those guys taught me loads of things.
That's good. And you're kind of continuing.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that was very interesting. And I hope a lot of people found that interesting because I am absolutely useless when it comes to settings because I don't really, I can hear the difference, but I don't really know what goes into it. And I guess it's very interesting trying to, experiment a little bit.
Yeah, the best way to do it is that, especially if you are playing in a band, because you'll play in one room on a certain gig, and obviously you play different room shapes, sizes,
and with different amounts of people as well, because that
always
makes
changes.
A difference.
Your settings are usually roughly the same, but you'll notice you have to put different settings in different scenarios, which is an interesting thing when you first start playing. Because one night you'll be doing a gig and however you've set the amp up, you think, God, this is the perfect setting, and you try and remember the setting, Next week you're playing a different venue, you think, it sounds
you played in a church,
rubbish.
Actually.
Yeah, churches, they're actually quite a good venue.
Well, you got good reverb there.
Yeah, you don't have to have any reverb on there. Natural reverb.
And you're playing in Liverpool Central Library soon.
Yes, for the special event I think it's called How Did We Do It?
Yeah, it's an exhibition about the Beatles and Merseybeat.
Yeah, Merseybeat sound in general from 63.
Mm-hmm.
And we're playing that.
What day?
It's a Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
And the 17th, I think, of June.
Well, that's great to know. And every Sunday you're also playing at the Cavern. So if anyone wants to hear Liam's legendary
tone. By the way, the amps that are used at the Cavern are the VOX AC30 VR one, which is the valve reactor.
Mm-hmm.
They're good. They're not as good as the full valve one.
Mm-hmm.
You can still get like a nice decent sound out of them.
Yeah.
And they're probably a little bit more reliable.
But again, the Cavern Club, the most famous club in the world, uses VOX. So that should tell you something as well. Well, thank you very much for being with me. I really, really like this insight into why we actually like this amp so much, because many things I feel like there is a lot of hype around them, but they're famous for being famous, if you get me. They are famous because everyone uses them, but no one really knows why they are famous in the first place. And then there's always...
Most guitarists will know why they're famous. But
no, exactly. But the thing is, many people, I feel, maybe like guitars or like playing music at not a professional level.
Yeah.
So they might not know these specifics. And I actually obviously hearing your stories, but that also gave me more knowledge about if I wanted to choose something, I would know, depending on, as you said, the music that you play, the sound that you want to achieve.
I love the thought of a lot of angry guitarists listening to it. What? You don't use pedal? Boxes are rubbish. But anyway.
Sorry, we endorse VOX without VOX knowing this, but
kind of endorse Fender, but Also, shut
We're
it
not
down
saying
instead.
the other. Hang on. What I really want to say, and this is going to be my disclaimer, is we are not saying that the other amps are bad.
No.
We are just saying that if you want to achieve that type of sound,
Yeah, then
it's
Vox.
going to be a Vox
Yeah.
specifically if you can do it.
Well, that's the great
an
thing about
AC30.
music, you know. Like, nothing's really wrong because everyone's
That's so true.
taste is so different.
Absolutely.
It's good that there is so much difference.
But if you don't want a
in
box,
sound.
you are wrong.
Yeah.
No, I'm joking. But that's absolutely true. It depends on what you're going to play. I mean, if somebody said to me, oh, I'm going to give you like a Marshall, I'm not going to say, oh, no, I'm not going to have it, you know.
Yeah.
But,
Well, especially a Marshall Blues Breaker.
yeah, there you go. But obviously, we thought it was going to be very, very interesting because of the story behind it as well. Because it's a bit sad in a way, because usually companies tend to, you know, go bankrupt because
They don't have the sales.
they don't have the sales, whereas here it was completely the opposite, and it's a bit sad, honestly.
Yeah.
Especially, you know, I always feel like stories that end at the end of the 60s are always quite tragic in a very, you know, kind of like Shakespearean way. Like,
Yeah.
it's very dramatic.
Well, actually, Jennings amps are now revered quite well.
Yeah.
Everyone would love a vintage Jennings amp.
No, exactly, because at the end of the day, the mind
It's still
behind it is
yeah.
still the same person. But Vox is obviously more of a
Yeah, they look
household
lovely.
name, clearly. So, well, again, thank you very much for being with me and sharing your knowledge.
In inverted commas.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. Let us know what type of amp you have or what the amp of your dreams is.
And we will let you know where you are going wrong.
No, stop saying that. We said we were going to say it after the recording. So if you want to say, as I was saying, the very weird car as well, the Voxmobile, you have to follow me on Instagram at the Cat's Whisker Podcast. And you can also follow me on TikTok at the Cat's Whisker. I post loads of extra content there. And the podcast is available on all the podcast platforms, but also on YouTube. And I post videos there as well. So if you always want to be updated with what I'm releasing, you can comment there, even send me a message if you love the episode. And again, thank you very much for listening. I'll see you next week. Ciao.
Buonanotte.